The ceremony hall glittered with 1,000 colors, each representing a different species gathered to celebrate their heroes. David Reed stood near the back wall, trying to make himself smaller. It was difficult when you were there. Only human in a room full of beings who could crush stone with their bare hands. His wife, Kira, stood on the central platform, her scaled skin reflecting the light like polished copper. She was beautiful, even by draconian standards. 8 feet tall with horns that curved back from her, temples and eyes that burned like molten gold. She wore her military uniform, decorated with medals earned in battles David could barely imagine, and for exceptional valor in defending Colony 7 against overwhelming odds. We present the star of Valor 2, Commander Kira. The announcer's voice boomed through the hall. The crowd erupted in cheers. Kira bowed her head as the medal was placed around her neck. David clapped along with everyone else, pride swelling in his chest. She had saved 12,000 lives that day, fighting for 16 hours straight without rest. Such a shame. A voice rumbled behind David. He didn't turn around. He knew what was coming, that one of our finest warriors is bound to such a weak creature. Another voice agreed. Look at him. No claws, no scales, no natural armor. What use is he? David kept his eyes on Kira. He had learned to ignore the whispers. They followed him everywhere in Coalition space. Humans were the newest members of the galactic community, and they were notoriously fragile compared to most other species. I heard he was a clerk or something, a paper pusher. No wonder she never brings him to military functions. I would be embarrassed, too. David's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Getting angry would only prove their point. Humans were emotional, they would say. Unstable, weak in body and mind. Kira finished her speech, thanking her fellow warriors and the Coalition for the honor. As she stepped down from the platform, a massive draconian warrior blocked her path. Commander Roth Tal. David recognized him immediately. Roth had served with Kira for years and made no secret of his feelings for her. Kira, Roth said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet hall. You honor us all with your courage, but I must speak plainly as a warrior should. Kira's eyes narrowed. Speak then, Roth. You deserve a mate worthy of your strength, a true warrior who can stand beside you in battle. Roth glanced toward David with unconcealed contempt. Not a human who hides in the shadows while you fight. The hall went silent. Every eye turned to look at David. He felt his face grow hot, but he didn't move. This was Kira's moment, not his. Kira's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. You dare question my choice of mate? I question your judgment, Roth replied. What can this human offer you? Protection. He cannot even protect himself. Strength. A child could overpower him. Honor. He has never seen battle. David finally moved, stepping forward through the crowd. Aliens parted before him like water. When he reached Kira's side, he placed a gentle hand on her arm. It's all right, he said softly. It is not all right, Kira snapped. But her anger wasn't directed at him. Roth, you forget yourself. I forget nothing, Roth said. I remember when you were the pride of our people. Before you married this human, David met Roth's gaze calmly. The draconian warrior towered over him by 3 feet and could probably tear him apart without effort. But David had learned something during his years in space. Physical strength wasn't everything. You're right, David said, his voice steady. I'm not a warrior like you. I can't breathe fire or bend steel. But I love her and she loves me. That's enough for us, Roth snorted. Love, a human concept. Warriors need strength, not soft feelings. Then perhaps you don't understand what makes a true warrior, David replied. The crowd gasped. Several draconians growled low in their throats. Challenging Roth's honor was dangerous, even for another draconian. For a human, it was practically suicide. Roth leaned down until his face was inches from David's. Heat radiated from his breath. You have courage, little human. Foolish courage. Perhaps you wish to back up your words with action. Roth, enough. Kira stepped between them. This is neither the time nor place. She protects you, Roth said, laughing. Like a mother protecting a child. This is the mate of our greatest warrior. Pathetic, David felt something. Old and cold stir inside him. A memory perhaps, or something deeper. His hand unconsciously moved to the sword at his hip. It was an old blade passed down through his family for generations. Most aliens found it primitive and amusing. A weapon from Earth's distant past. Useless in an age of plasma weapons and energy shields. But the sword felt warm under his touch, almost alive. Before David could respond, alarms blared throughout the hall. The celebration lights dimmed, replaced by harsh red emergency lighting. A hologram appeared in the center of the room, showing a coalition officer with fear in his eyes. Priority alert to all military personnel. Outpost Delta 9 is under attack. The enemy is their shadow entities. The void has returned. The hall erupted into chaos. Warriors rushed toward the exits, calling for their weapons and their ships. Kira grabbed David's hand, her eyes wide. The void, she whispered. After all these years, David had heard stories about the void. Ancient tales of shadow creatures. That consumed entire worlds. That even the mighty Draconians feared. He had thought they were legends, warnings told to children. But the fear in Kara's eyes told him otherwise. I have to go, she said. David, stay here where it's safe. Kira, please. She squeezed his hand. I cannot fight if I'm worried about you. David nodded slowly. What else could he do? She was right. He would only be in the way. Kira kissed him quickly, then ran after the other warriors. Roth paused at the doorway, looking back at David with something almost like pity. Stay hidden, human. Leave the fighting to those strong enough to face it. Then he was gone, and David stood alone in the empty ceremony hall. The Star of Valor lay forgotten on the platform, its light dimmed by the emergency alarms. David looked down at his sword, the ancient blade that everyone mocked. In the red light, he could almost see something moving within the metal, a shimmer like heat rising from summer pavement. Maybe, he whispered to himself, it's time to stop hiding. He didn't know why he said it. He didn't know what he meant. But deep inside, in a place beyond thought or reason, something ancient woke up and whispered back. Soon, David refused to stay behind. He pulled rank as a diplomatic liaison, a position he rarely used, and secured a spot on the transport ship heading to Outpost Delta 9. Kira hadn't been happy about it, but she had too many other problems to argue. Now he sat in the troop compartment, surrounded by warriors who pretended he didn't exist. Draconian soldiers checked their plasma rifles and energy blades. A group of Thorian shock troops, massive beings made of living crystal, meditated in silence. Even the pilot was a decorated veteran, a four-armed Sadari with enough combat experience to fill a library. And then there was David, wearing a simple environmental suit and carrying a sword that belonged in a museum. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewport, David could see Outpost Delta 9, or what was left of it. The station hung in space like a dying star. Sections of it were simply gone, as if something had taken bites out of the metal. The defense shields flickered weakly, barely holding. Worse were the shapes moving around it. Dark things that seemed to absorb light itself, leaving holes in space where they passed. By the ancient fires, someone whispered, there are hundreds of them. Roth stood at the front of the compartment, his face grim. Listen well. These creatures feed on energy. They will drain your shields, your weapons, even your body's natural energy. Stay together. Watch each other's backs. And for the sake of all life, do not let them touch you. The ship docked with the station, through an emergency airlock. The moment the door opened, David heard the screaming. Warriors poured into the corridor, weapons ready. David followed, keeping close to Kira. She had given up trying to send him back. Instead, she had assigned herself as his personal guard, which made several soldiers grumble about wasted resources. The outpost was a nightmare. Emergency lights cast everything in shades of red and black. Bodies lay scattered in the corridors, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Some were dried husks as if every drop of moisture had been sucked out of them. Others looked peaceful, like they had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. They drained life itself, Kira explained, her voice tight. Not just energy. Everything that makes something alive. A shadow moved at the end of the corridor. It had a roughly humanoid shape, but its edges kept shifting and blurring. Where it touched the walls, The metal corroded and crumbled. "Open fire," Roth commanded. Plasma bolts filled the corridor with blue-white light. The energy beams struck the shadow creature dead center. But instead of destroying it, the creature seemed to drink the energy in. It grew larger, more solid, more real. "Cease fire," Roth shouted, but 3 more soldiers had already fired. The shadow creature swelled to twice its original size. Then it lunged forward with impossible speed. The creature tore through the front line like paper. Soldiers fell, their shields useless. Their energy weapons became liabilities. Every shot they fired only made the creature stronger. David watched in horror as a Thorian warrior, a being strong enough to punch through starship hull, was touched by the shadow. The crystal giant didn't even have time to scream. He simply crumbled to dust. His life force consumed in seconds. "Fall back." Kira was pulling David away back toward the ship. Everyone fall back. But more shadows were appearing now, cutting off their escape. The warriors found themselves trapped between the creatures. Their most powerful weapons useless against an enemy that fed on energy itself. Roth roared in frustration, launching himself at the nearest shadow with just his claws and teeth. For a moment, David thought it might work. Physical attacks didn't feed the creatures. But Roth's natural energy, the power that ran through every draconian, was still fuel for them. The shadow wrapped around him like a blanket drinking deep. Kira screamed her fellow warrior's name. She started forward, but David grabbed her arm. "Don't," he said. "You can't help him that way." "Then what do we do?" Kira's voice broke. "How do we fight something that uses our strength against us?" David's mind raced. He had studied ancient warfare, back when he was a military historian for Earth's Defense Forces, before the incident that got him discharged. Before he met Care and left all of that behind, physical weapons, he said suddenly. Old-style weapons that don't use energy. That's primitive, a soldier spat. Useless against real threats. More useless than weapons that make the enemy stronger. David shot back. He drew his sword. The blade caught the emergency lighting, reflecting it in strange patterns. For just a moment, David thought he saw those patterns form words. Ancient words in a language he didn't know but somehow understood strike true. One of the shadow creatures noticed him. It flowed toward him like smoke, ignoring the warriors with their plasma weapons. David's mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But he thought of Kira. He thought of all the people dying because energy, weapons were useless. He thought of Roth's mocking words about human weakness. Then he stepped forward and swung his sword. The blade passed through the shadow creature's form. David expected it to do nothing. But where the sword touched, the shadow recoiled. Not destroyed, but hurt. Definitely hurt. The creature made a sound like tearing metal and pulled away from him. It retreated into the darkness, leaving behind a smell like ozone and decay. Everyone stared at David, at his sword, at the place where the shadow creature had fled. "How?" Kira whispered. David looked at his blade. It was glowing now, just faintly. A soft blue light that seemed to push back the darkness. "I don't know, but it worked." Roth pulled himself free from the shadow that had been draining him. The draconian warrior looked weak, his scales dull, and his breathing labored. But he was alive. He stared at David with new eyes. "Your weapon. It has no power source. It's just steel," David said, "forged on Earth centuries ago." "Not just steel," a new voice said. An old woman appeared from a side corridor, leaning on a staff. She wore robes that marked her as an elder, one of the ancient beings who guided the coalition. "That blade carries something far older than steel. Something the void fears." "Elder Cirrus," Kira bowed her head in respect. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting," the old woman said, her eyes fixed on David. "Waiting for someone to remember what was forgotten. Young human, your ancestors fought these creatures before. Long before space travel. Long before the coalition existed." "That's impossible," David said. "Humans only reached the stars 200 years ago. You reached them again." Elder Cirrus corrected. "Your people have risen and fallen before. And each time you fought the void, each time you won. Not with energy or advanced technology, but with something simpler, something pure." She gestured to a sword. "That blade is a key, one of many. The void has returned because." The old locks are failing and only humans can. Forge them anew. A roar echoed through the corridor. More shadows were coming, drawn by the commotion. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The surviving warriors grouped together. But without their energy weapons, they were nearly helpless. David looked at his sword, then at Kira's frightened face. He thought about running, letting someone else be the hero. He was just a historian after all, a weak human in a galaxy of warriors. But his hand tightened on the sword's grip, and it grew brighter, warm, almost alive. Get everyone to the ship, he told Kira. I'll buy you time. David, no. Trust me, he said, meeting her eyes. For once, let me protect you. Before she could argue, he ran toward the advancing shadows. His sword blazed with light cutting through the darkness. Behind him, he heard Kira shouting orders, organizing the retreat. David didn't know if he would survive. But for the first time since entering Coalition space, he felt strong. Not despite being human, because of it. 3 days passed after the disaster at Outpost Delta. 9. David spent most of that time in the medical bay. Not because he was injured, but because scientists wanted to study his sword. They ran every test they could think of and found nothing special. Just old steel and leather grip. Yet, everyone had seen it glow. Everyone had seen the shadows retreat from it. Elder Cirrus finally put an end to the tests. She ordered David, Kira, and a select few warriors to join her on a journey. Their destination was a place called Ashsend, a dead world on the edge of known space. She refused to explain why until they arrived. The planet looked like its name suggested. Grey ash covered everything, drifting in the thin atmosphere like snow. Dead cities jutted from the ground like broken teeth. And in orbit around the planet floated thousands of wrecked ships. Some were recognizable Coalition designs. Others were older, stranger. A few were so ancient they had to be thousands of years old. What happened here? Kira asked, staring at the graveyard of vessels. The First War, Elder Cirrus said quietly. When the Void first came to this galaxy, every species that could fight came here to stop them. Most never left. The ship descended through the ash clouds and landed near a massive structure. It was a temple, but unlike any David had seen before. The architecture was wrong somehow. The proportions and angles made his eyes hurt to look at too long. But there was something familiar about it, too. Something that tugged at his memory. I know this place, he whispered. I've seen it before. In dreams, perhaps, Elder Cirrus said. Your blood remembers what your mind has. Forgotten. Roth stood with them, still weak from his encounter with the Void. The proud warrior had been quiet since the outpost, watching David with a mix of confusion and grudging respect. Now, he carried a simple metal spear instead of his plasma rifle. Several other warriors had also abandoned energy weapons in favor of basic blades and clubs. They entered the temple through doors that opened at Elder Cirrus's touch. Inside, the walls were covered with carvings. They showed figures fighting shadow creatures. The figures were small with no natural armor or claws. They looked almost human. Your ancestors built this place, Elder Cirrus explained as they walked deeper into the temple. Humans were the first to face the Void, the first to learn how to fight them. But humans weren't even spacefaring back then, David protested. How could they build something here? They didn't need ships. The Elder said they had something better. They had will. The group reached a large chamber. Holographic displays activated as they entered, showing scenes from the ancient war. Humans, thousands of them, standing against waves of shadow. They fought with swords and spears, shields and arrows. Primitive weapons that glowed with the same blue light David's sword produced. One hologram showed a human warrior facing down a massive void creature alone. His sword blazed like a star as he struck and the shadow thing dissolved into nothing. How? Kira asked. How did they make their weapons glow? They didn't make them glow. Elder Cirrus corrected. The weapons reflect what burns inside them. Humans feel things deeply. Love, hope, courage, desperation. Those feelings become real when facing the void. They become power, emotional energy. Roth sounded skeptical. That's not possible. Yet you saw it work, the Elder reminded him. David's sword glowed because he was protecting those he cared about. The void feeds on physical energy. Yes, but they starve on emotions. Human emotion is poison to them. David stared at the holograms. His sword felt heavier at his hip, more important. What happened to them? The humans who fought here. Elder Sirius's face grew sad. They won, but at terrible cost. They sealed the void away using weapons of incredible power. Weapons forged from pure human will. These weapons became known as Heaven's Edge. But to power them, the warriors had to sacrifice everything. Their lives, their world, their future. Only a handful survived, scattered across the galaxy. In time, humanity forgot its past and had to claw its way back to the stars the slow way. Why are you telling us this now? Kira asked. Because the seals are breaking. Elder Siri said, the void is returning. And humanity's new generation must take up the burden their ancestors carried. She led them to the center of the chamber. There, floating in a beam of light, was a sword. It looked similar to David's blade, but larger, more refined. The metal seemed to shift colors as they watched, never quite settling on any shade. The Sword of Dawn's breaking, Elder Sirius announced. One of the 7 Heavens' edge weapons. It was forged by a human warrior named Sarah, who gave her life to trap the Void King himself. The sword has waited here for millennia for another human worthy to wield it. David felt drawn to the sword. His own blade vibrated at his side as if recognizing its older sibling. He reached out slowly. Wait. Roth grabbed his arm. If this